Well, I grew up in Berea, which was close to the airport, and the pilots would come a week before the air races, which lasted a week. So for 2 weeks, I was just in seventh heaven as these little guys would come buzzing over the house, and they're sounded like a bunch of hornets.
One of the neighbors worked down there. I was very young. And then he would take the children in the neighborhood. We'd get in his old car and go down there. And we didn't have to pay to get in because he took us where he worked. And it was just fascinating.
The National Air Races. Who can forget the excitement of this annual celebration of speed in the 1930s and 40s? For 1 week every September, we trekked out to the airport and enjoyed the thrills of the world's fastest motorsport. And even when we couldn't afford the price of admission, we still found a way to marvel at the skill and daring of the swashbuckling pilots and their magnificent flying machines.
My mother and Dad would pile us in the car, 3 of us, but we didn't go in. We went to some of the bean fields on Engle Road, and we parked the car there, and then we would watch the air races.
When the stands were built in 1929, they were built to accommodate 100,000 people. However, not everyone had the money to come to the airport and be in the stands, and as the racers went over a large part of the west side of Cleveland, people would park in parks or on streets, and many people would rent out their front yards. They would charge a quarter or 50 cents. They also would sell soda pop and hot dogs. Many people rented their homes to the pilots and some of the other people that came here. I talked to a number of people that told me as a boy I had to sleep under the dining room table because my bedroom was rented out to someone.
But it was so incredibly exciting for a 10-year-old. I mean, you had, the cars were all boxy in those days, so streamlined trains and racing planes, that's where all the action was for a little boy. And it was just marvelous watching these things, and of course the photographs of the pilots and the suave and their helmets and all these things, and they were real heroic.
They posed by the plane, and Roscoe Turner had one of these caps, these leather caps that fit. Remember that? Yeah. And he had this mustache that I swear was painted on. It was like, or oiled or something. It was a great big thing with handlebars on it, but very dashing, very dashing.
But Roscoe was different from most pilots in that he didn't want to be seen as the average barnstorming pilot, whereas most of them wore their World War I leather flying jackets and just about anything. Roscoe created a uniform for himself. He wore riding breeches, polished boots, a blue tunic, Sam Browning belt, and a cap, and he created his own wings studded with diamonds. So he was well known. The Gilmore Oil Company sponsored him, and he wanted to be even more noticeable, so he purchased this lion cub. Everyone said you couldn't tame a lion cub, but Roscoe in fact did. And he took the lion cub virtually everywhere he went when he was flying for records, including here at the races, and there are many chambermaids that will tell you that they didn't like what the lion did in the hotel rooms. Early on, Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals contacted Roscoe and said, Roscoe, you're up there in the air and you have that safety net of a parachute. Now this poor lion's riding in that airplane with you, and we think the lion should have a parachute. So Roscoe said, okay, we'll get the lion a parachute. And as the lion grew, obviously the parachute had to be renewed, and they made, I believe, 3 or 5 of them to suit the size of the lion.
Roscoe Turner worked hard to maintain his glamorous, dashing image, and he worked just as hard on breaking speed records. Turner is the only 3-time winner of the Thompson Trophy race, a race named for Cleveland's Thompson Products Company, which we know today as TRW. Jimmy Doolittle was another star of the Cleveland National Air Races. He was known not for a flamboyant personality, but for flying a very unusual plane called the GB.
It was called the GB because it was built by the Granville brothers. They had this unique idea of the shape of a falling drop of water being aerodynamically pure. It was tested in a wind tunnel. However, the airplane was not easy to fly. It was considered that only 3 men in this country at that time could successfully fly that airplane. Jimmy went on to win the Shell Speed Dash that year and made quite a name for himself.
The national air races brought thrills and excitement into our lives. And just as important, they were a proving ground for American aviators, many of whom went on to help write a chapter in world history.
And these fellows built these airplanes, and they devised all kinds of things that were eventually used during the war. And many of these men went on to become test pilots and designers and help the war effort. Without the national air races, I seriously doubt if we would have had air supremacy in World War II as early as we did.
It was the biggest thing going in those days as far as aviation went. Yes, it was, and it put Cleveland right at the center of it. And it was great for Cleveland. Great for the country. Great for me. I loved it.
Hi, this is Bob Fairmont, School Hope.
Hi, Bob. This is Gene Carroll in Cleveland.
No, what do you say, Gene? How are things in my old hometown?
Well, that's what I'm calling you about. How'd you like to come back to Cleveland and be on a nice TV show that I'm producing for Landmark Farm Bureau Cooperatives? We're going to have some of your friends here and some surprises for you on TV.
No kidding. They got TV in Cleveland now?
Oh.
Do you remember where you were the day that television came to Cleveland? Think back to December 1947. That's when WEWS-TV signed on as the first television station in Ohio. The first program we were able to watch here in Northeast Ohio was a live broadcast of the annual Cleveland Press Christmas Show with special guest Jimmy Stewart. And that was only the beginning. As the years went by, we began to spend a good deal of time in front of the television set, watching many programs that were produced right here in Cleveland. We enjoyed good conversation with Dorothy Fuldheim on her 1 o'clock club. We tapped our feet in time to the music on polka varieties. We got in shape with Paige Palmer. And we laughed along with our children at the antics of Captain Penny and his sidekick, Jungle Larry. But there was a time not so very long ago when entertainment meant more than settling down for the evening in front of the television set. In the days before TV, we used to hit the town when the sun went down to enjoy swinging music and big-name bands. Andy Anderson is an 85-year-old tenor saxophonist who grew up in Cleveland and performed at many of the city's nightclubs in the 1930s. He remembers a time when Cleveland came alive after dark as we dressed up in our best clothes and headed downtown to where the action was.
You had dance halls, theaters, and radio shows, and nightclubs. Well, then you had big bands then traveling. So maybe Duke Ellington may be here tonight, you know, then maybe next week maybe have Fletcher Henderson.
Cleveland was a very large show town. We had clubs that we worked like Moe's Main Street. There was Corey's. There was the Bogart Club. There was the Cabin Club. And, of course, most people will remember Chin's Victory Room.
Ann Carroll worked as a dancer, singer, and MC at many of Cleveland's hot spots in the 1940s.
We had so many well-known people working these clubs, and I was lucky enough at a young age to work these places with a lot of well-known people. And then there was the World War II, where we had the Stage Door Canteen, and we had people like Artie Shaw, Dolores and Bob Hope come and perform, and they were so very gracious to us beginners in the business. The theaters, Palace Theater, you would go in at 8:30 in the morning, and you'd rehearse. Now, the bill consisted of maybe 20 acts, and there was maybe a 25-piece band. Well, each performer would take one musician, and at the same time, on the same stage, we all rehearsed. You closed your ears to whatever else anybody else was doing. And at 11:30, the theater opened, and you started your first show. you had a show for you did your live show for about an hour, and then they would have a movie. So you never could be away from the theater more than an hour, okay? So you worked from 11:30 in the morning till maybe midnight.
When performers got off work late at night and wanted a place to relax and unwind, they'd head over to Val's to hear jazz great Art Tatum work his magic on the piano. Val's was a tiny club tucked away behind two storefronts at East 86th and Cedar.
But Art liked it back there. And when Art's in town, everybody's in town to come and hear him. And word get around, and the people in the theater, if they're on, I don't care what show, it's a Hannah Theater, Hippodrome, Art's in town, let's go with Val's, okay. And you couldn't get in Val's. People be lined up all over to hear him play.
Another popular gathering place was the Short Vincent, an alley off of East 9th Street downtown that was lined with restaurants and clubs.
I never worked that area because you had to mix. Mixing was sitting with customers and drinking. And my parents were so opposed to me performing, going into a club performing, so I kind of stayed away from stuff like that. But it was, Short Vincent was alive. Come 7 o'clock at night, it was alive until the clubs closed at 2:30 in the morning.
Short Vincent was perhaps best known as the home of the Roxy, one of the leading burlesque houses in the nation.
The Roxy produced many of the leading people in movies today and years ago, such as Bob Hope, the Burns and Allen, Three Stooges. All of them started with burlesque. And I feel burlesque was an asset to Cleveland because it drew the people.
Yes, live entertainment for every taste abounded here in Cleveland not so very long ago. And we didn't have to go to a nightclub to catch a live act. Many times we were treated to vaudeville shows, comics, or dancers when we went to one of the grand old movie houses, like the Palace, Keith's 105th, the Hippodrome, and many others.
I remember going down to the Palace and seeing Gene Krupa in a live band, right, a vaudeville right on the stage. And but they great big staircases that went up and very ornate, beautiful, great big huge chandeliers in the middle, just like the old Palace, the old State Theater.
The downtown theaters were lavish temples of cinema. But when we were kids, the place to be on a Saturday afternoon was the neighborhood movie house.
The matinee on Saturday was a big attraction for young people. It may have only cost a dime at the time, but every week we'd come. And one of the things that brought us back was not only the feature movie, but there's a serial. And the serial would go on week after week after week, and invariably had a way of ending with the hero or the heroine in a very critical situation. Either they're about to be pushed off a running train in the middle of, or run over by a train or whatever, and then so you want to come back the following week. And then during the intermission, after the main feature was over, there would be projections on the screen of various songs, and there'd be a bouncing ball that accompanied the lyrics of it. The audience would know exactly how to sing the song, whether it's Home on the Range, or I've been working on the railroad. So those of us who didn't know the exact spot could just follow the bouncing ball on the screen. So going to the movies on a Saturday was quite an event.
And of course, you had your dish night at that time, where they give away dishes, and they gave away money.
My parents would go and they'd get like combs and brushes and dishes and everything. I remember the time my father went and won a live turkey. He came home and he took it into the basement to kill it, and the head, it was running around without the head and blood. Oh, all right. Kids are screaming. We used to, in high school, we'd, if you had higher grades, they'd let you out to go to the neighborhoods and you'd collect their iron, tin cans, and all kinds of. Yeah, and I remember I said to my mother, somebody put in a new fry pan, one of those iron ones. I said, I was tempted to take it. Oh, the war. Well, we had the rationing.
We used to paint our legs. Remember? Because we couldn't get
stuck.
Yes, right. This makeup would drip down your leg. You couldn't cross your legs because it was fire. People didn't have cameras the way they have now, and so you waited until the photographer came through the neighborhood, usually with a pony. Remember that? He'd take pictures. Well, he came through our neighborhood, and I had the mumps. But Mother said, it's now or never, so I had my picture taken with mumps. But we did have a photograph, because that happened like once a year.
Right.
That brings back memories.
Cleveland Memories will return with visits to Euclid Beach, the old ballrooms, and much more.